Hey, everybody. Sorry, I got caught up doing laundry. You know, regular life shit. So, Glock, how you doing? Angel Gamer, Johnny Boy, uh, Spider Dog, the man, the myth, the legend has a premiere coming up. Let me let me get it up real quick, and we shall share that. Sweet Melissa. There is Spider Dog stream for 5 o'clock, and let me tell you, you really do not want to miss it. Uh, I don't know what were we up uh till like 3 a.m. talking about this Spider Dog. I really cannot tell y'all how powerful what uh, Spider Dog has done is. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go over Antisemitism USA. This is from George Mason University's R2 Studios. Let me share their page. They don't have a whole lot of content, but what they have is really good. Uh, they only have 378 subscribers, so uh, this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But this will lead into Spider Dog, and then we should probably be up to Hill Pirates time. So we definitely will not finish this documentary. It's broken up into 10 parts. Um, so let me. Oops. That didn't do right. Let's go. I'm gonna have to do this. Sorry, y'all. How are you feeling? Oh, head is awful. Yeesh. Sorry. I know surgeries are rough. Okay. Share. There won't be any. Um, Let me know if y'all can hear it. Is there sound? Mm. All right, hang on. I hate it when this happens.
Dogs. It's a beautiful community to be part of.
How about now?
It was also the scene of a horrific attack against Jews.
Gets a better. I should.
Robert comes from the Henry Luce Foundation and the David Bruce Smith Foundation.
Finally, okay.
Squirrel Hill is one of the oldest Jewish neighborhoods in the United States. It's in Pittsburgh, and historically it's been about a third Jewish, give or take. There's a Jewish community center, there are Jewish businesses and synagogues. It's a beautiful community to be part of. It was also the scene of a horrific attack against Jews. Robert Bowers hated immigrants, and he believed that Jews were encouraging immigration. And on Shabbat morning, Saturday, October 27, 2018, Bowers entered the Tree of Life Synagogue. Now, inside that building, there were 3 different congregations worshiping in different areas. There was Tree of Life, main congregation, and then 2 others that rented space, Dor Chadash and New Light. Bowers shot and killed 11 people from among all 3 congregations. Their names were Daniel Stein, Joyce Feinberg, Richard Gottfried, Rose Mallinger, Jerry Rabinowitz, Cecil Rosenthal, David Rosenthal, Bernice Simon, Sylvan Simon, Melvin Wax, and Irv Younger. The youngest person murdered was 54 years old. The oldest was 97. It was the deadliest attack on Jews in American history. 5 years later, in August of 2023, a federal court found Bowers guilty of all 11 deaths, and he was sentenced to death. After events like the Tree of Life shootings in Pittsburgh, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, or after the October 7th Hamas attacks, Americans often talk about anti-Semitism in the US today as if it were something new, something without a history. Politicians and pundits, and just normal everyday Jews, express dismay, but they also express surprise. They say, where did this come from? But anti-Semitism in the US is not new. It has a history, a long history, a history that's complex and often at odds with itself.
Comes with a short memory, right? Forget about the time of anti-Semitism and racism because we want to cover our sins and our guilt. What's up, Linda P? How's Hazel? She's a good girl. I want to see Hazel watching TV like Val does.
It's a history that is easy to overlook. Now, in a certain sense, Americans and even American Jews haven't been interested in that history. We like to believe that this country has always been good for the Jews. And there are good reasons for that belief. Anti-Semitism in the US has never been deadly the way that anti-Jewish violence in Europe or North Africa or the Middle East has been really, really deadly. You can make a pretty good argument that in no country, except maybe Israel, have Jews been freer than in the United States, free from violence, free from bigotry, free from hatred. Compared with basically every other land in the world in the past 2,000 years, the United States has been the promised land for Jews. But there has been anti-Semitism here.
There is a reason why almost half the world's Jews live in America, right? The first Jews arrived on the shores of America in 1587. Been here a minute. Amen, Donald. Amen. It's the hate of others, but yeah, we'll get there.
Since before the nation's founding, there's been religious bigotry. There's been racialized hatred directed toward Jews and conspiracy theories and stereotypes, and we have to talk about it. I'm Mark Oppenheimer, and this is Antisemitism USA, a podcast about the history of anti-Semitism in the United States. Episode 1, No Sanction to Bigotry.
Spider Dog, you're absolutely right. I kind of let myself become ignorant of it, and a stubby little dwarf ignited my fire and reminded me that you have to stand up to bigotry no matter where you are. You can call me a pinko liberal all they want, but I know what silence leads to, right? What's up, Trump said?
Let's turn back to that 2018 massacre in Squirrel Hill and look at the motives of the shooter, because Robert Bowers' motives are a clue to what anti-Semitism is and what it's been throughout American history. A simple definition of anti-Semitism is hatred of Jews. But the gunman at Tree of Life hated Jews in that synagogue for a very specific reason. Robert Bowers believed that immigrants from South America arriving in the US would be violent toward white people. And crucially, he believed that Jews were engaged in a secret conspiracy to encourage immigrants to replace white Americans. Now, one of the congregations inside that building, Dor Hadash, had partnered with Hayas, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, to sponsor a national refugee Shabbat, a Sabbath day in honor of refugees. There was nothing secretive or conspiratorial about it. These Jews did support immigrants, not to replace or kill white people, but to welcome them. But that's not how Bowers saw it. Shortly before the shooting, he wrote that Hayas, quote, likes to bring invaders, meaning immigrants, in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics, I'm going in. He meant going into the synagogue to shoot Jews. Anti-Semitism is a convenient hatred. It's something to reach for anytime someone is angry about the world and needs some group to blame. Wherever hatred or conspiratorial thinking flourishes, you can probably find anti-Semitism flourishing too. Here's Yair Rosenberg, a staff writer at The Atlantic magazine who covers politics and religion and writes a lot about contemporary anti-Semitism.
Most people conceive of anti-Semitism as a personal prejudice, like many others, which means that a bigot despises Jews because they're different, just as they might despise other people who are different, whether they're too black, too Muslim, or too Jewish. And anti-Semitism absolutely is a personal prejudice, but it's also something else. It's a conspiracy theory about how the world works that posits sinister string-pulling Jews behind the scenes who are behind social and political problems. And that kind of anti-Semitism is less well understood because it's not how many other prejudices operate. But it's also the kind of anti-Semitism that if you scratch beneath the surface is the sort that is more dangerous and tends to get Jews killed, including today. You look at recent anti-Semitic attacks on American soil, whether it's the massacre at Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue or the shooting at a kosher supermarket in Jersey City just a few years ago, or the hostage situation in Colleyville, Texas, where an entire congregation was held hostage for much of the Jewish Sabbath. In all of these cases, the perpetrators had completely different backgrounds. In Pittsburgh, it was a white supremacist. In Jersey City, it was people who were sympathetic to the Black Hebrew Israelite movement. And then in Colleyville, Texas, it was Muslim extremists from Britain.
So you notice that there's, the different perpetrators, but the same target. What's up, Groovy? Streaming for shut-ins. I saw you there. You're absolutely right. On the act up. Silence equals death. Ignorance equals fear.
Ostensibly, these things have no connection to each other. But if you look at the ideology of all the perpetrators, they all acted because they believed that Jews controlled American society, were responsible for its problems, and it had outsized influence over it. So the white supremacist attacked the synagogue because he thought that Jews were responsible for flooding the country with the brown people that he hated, as part of what he called the great replacement of the white race. The Black Hebrew Israelite sympathizers who attacked the kosher supermarket, one of them had written on social media about how the Jews controlled the government. And the Islamic extremist who held that synagogue hostage in Texas did so because he thought that American rabbis held sway over America's authorities and could get somebody released from prison nearby.
So we hear that rhetoric, right? We hear that rhetoric all bundled up into one place. In our little corner, right? But if it's concentrated into one small node, how that information gets disseminated, and then you play the game of telephone and how things get worse as it spreads, right? It's a contagion.
So all of these very dangerous and deadly anti-Semitic attacks were actually motivated by this conspiracy theory of Jewish control.
Conspiratorial thinking is powerful, and anti-Semitism is an old and virulent form of conspiratorial thinking. People have been believing conspiracy theories about Jews for at least a millennium. In the United States, conspiracy thinking didn't even become the dominant form of anti-Semitism until the early 20th century. For that, we can blame Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company.
Yep.
In addition to giving the world affordable automobiles produced on an assembly line, he also popularized a deadly conspiracy theory based on a Russian hoax in the early 20th century. And since that time, conspiratorial thinking has been the main form of anti-Semitism in the US. And we'll get back to Henry Ford and his role in this. But there are other strains of anti-Semitism. And over the course of this series, we'll explore the ways that Jews were systematically denied citizenship rights in colonial America, and in many places after the American Revolution. We'll talk about how Christian missionaries attempted to convert Jews. We'll talk about laws that made it difficult for Jews to practice their religion. We'll explain how Jews were kept out of elite hotels and resorts. We'll talk about the rise of scientific racism in the 19th century. We'll see how conspiracy theories infected the general population and even parts of the US government. We will examine how the government failed to help Jewish refugees before, during, and after the Holocaust. And we will talk about the rise of anti-Zionism and how it can serve as a thin veneer over anti-Semitism. And we'll
Todd, maybe you need to listen to this and Spider Dog's premiere after this. You might learn something. And you might. It's a reaction out of fear and lack of understanding, Groovy. Not you, but the anti-Semitism, racism thing. Things born out of ignorance.
talk about the recent rise of white supremacist anti-Semitism in the contemporary United States. By most any measure, anti-Semitism is on the rise in the US. According to a survey by the Anti-Defamation League in 2022, 1/5 of Americans hold extensively anti-Semitic views. And we'll dig into that data in a later episode. For now, what matters is that this
1/5 of 350 million. Think about that metric.
is the highest percentage that the ADL has seen in many years. White supremacists and neo-Nazis have grown in strength and significance. So too has anti-Semitic vandalism in public schools and on synagogue walls. Everyday instances of anti-Semitic slurs or low-level violence and harassment of Jews have also grown significantly. Public figures, from politicians to celebrities, routinely bring up anti-Semitic ideas. Jews are harassed on college campuses. Where did this all come from? We'll dive in after the break. Aaron Lopez and his family had gotten used to adapting. The Lopezes were Sephardic Jews from Portugal. They were conversos, Jews who had outwardly converted to Catholicism, but had privately maintained their Jewish identity and practice. Under threat from the Portuguese Inquisition, the family started emigrating to the British colonies around 1740. Prior to this moment,
Donald, I was on a Zoom call yesterday with a group, and They're saying probably 40% based on recent polling. As of 2024. Boston.
And Aaron Lopez wasn't called Aaron Lopez. He was known as Duarte or Edward Lopez. But when he emigrated, he adopted a Jewish name, Aaron. He was also circumcised at the age of 20. In the early 1750s, Aaron Lopez settled in Newport, Rhode Island. In the colonies, he could be a new man, a Jewish man. And, as it came to pass, a rich man. In fact, Lopez became Newport's richest man. At one point, he paid twice as much in taxes as the next wealthiest man in the city.
You can bring whatever receipts you think you have, Todd.
He traded in soap, candles made from sperm whale oil, and slaves. In a partnership with his father-in-law, he backed ships that forcibly brought hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children from Africa to the Caribbean and South Carolina. Now, there's an anti-Semitic canard out there that it was primarily Jews who were responsible for the slave trade. That is far from the truth. Jewish merchants, in fact, played a pretty small role. But trading in human beings was one thing that made Lopez and his family rich. He also owned slaves himself. Lopez had the respect of many of his Christian neighbors. Ezra Stiles, a longtime Newport minister and later president of Yale College, praised Lopez as
a merchant of eminence, of polite and amiable manners. Hospitality, liberality, and benevolence were his true characteristics.
In other words, according to Stiles, Lopez was an ideal member of the community. Except for one thing. Lopez was a Jew. Rhode Island had a long tradition of...
Todd, I read books and newspapers. I check and recheck my data. I don't watch Tim Pool or Fleckus or whatever conspiracy shit you are on this day of the week. Oh, and great job on your latest conspiracy corner. Fully debunked, by the way.
Religious toleration and pluralism. The colony's 1663 charter declared that its inhabitants would, quote, have and enjoy his and their own judgments and consciences in matters of religious concernments. On September 9th, 1761, Lopez and another Jewish merchant, Isaac Eliezer, petitioned the Superior Court of Newport to become naturalized as British subjects under the Plantation Act of 1740. This act gave individuals the right to obtain naturalization after 7 years of residence in the British colonies. Normally, the procedure involved taking an oath of allegiance to the crown and making a profession of Protestant Christianity. But the 1740 Act exempted both Quakers and Jews from this requirement.
Anti-Jew vandalism is up 80%.
The right to worship as he pleased was probably just one of Lopez's motivations for naturalization. Parliament restricted foreign immigrants like him from fully participating in Britain's commercial empire. So Lopez had a few reasons for wanting the same rights as a natural-born subject of King George III. After Lopez and Eliezer submitted their petitions to the Newport Superior Court, things seemed to be...
Nah, I mean, I'm willing to see receipts and then check and recheck them to make sure that said receipts are valid and change my view. It's kind of like the scientific method, you know. You just wait on a more data and you can change your view based on the new data. It's amazing how that works. I don't know anything about that, Trump. I haven't been over there in a minute.
Be going as expected. On September 10th, they took the oath of allegiance as the Plantation Act required. So far, so good. But then, a month later, the colony's legislature essentially denied their petitions. It said that yes, Lopez and Eliezer could be admitted as lawful subjects of the king with the right to purchase land and pass it on to their heirs. But the good news stopped there.
Todd, I think you need to read the book understand who George Orwell was, read George Orwell's body of work, and understand that you know nothing about what 1984 was about. I did a whole study on Orwell, by the way. I absolutely adored Orwell and Ray Bradbury.
There. And the legislature was very clear about why. It's because they were Jews. The legislature's lower house wrote,
"The said Aaron Lopez hath declared himself."
Donald, my great grandfather got ran out of South Carolina.
To be by religion a Jew. This assembly doth not admit him, nor any other of that religion, to the full freedom of the colony, to be chosen into any office, nor allowed to give a vote as a freeman.
Eliezer's petition got the same treatment. The two Jews could buy land, but they could not hold office or vote. You might be saying, wait a second, what about Rhode Island being a haven for religious freedom? Well, the court argued that the colony's 1663 charter enshrined the free and quiet enjoyment of the Christian religion. Therefore, the petitions of Lopez and Eliezer were, quote, absolutely inconsistent with the colony's first principles. According to the minister Ezra Stiles, the court handled the petition in a way that seemed designed to give offense to Lopez and Eliezer. For example, on the day the court ruled on their petitions, the court also ordered a thief to be hung and sent an arsonist to the gallows and a perjurer to the stocks. Only then did the court call in Lopez and Eliezer. Here's what Ezra Stiles had to say about the court's behavior on that day.
The Jews were called to hear their almost equally mortifying sentence and judgment, which dismissed their petition for naturalization. Whether this was designedly or accidental in proceeding upon the business of the court, I don't learn.
So Stiles believed that the two Jews were deliberately thrown into that day's court session with the thief, the arsonist, and the perjurer, all to be handled together, as if to send a message. Now, neither Lopez nor Eliezer were inclined to just shrug their shoulders at the insult. Eliezer obtained his naturalization from New York. In that colony, Jews could vote and hold office. In fact, it was the only mainland British colony where Jews enjoyed such liberties. Lopez moved to Massachusetts for 3 weeks and got naturalized there. Naturalization didn't mean he could vote or hold office, but it formalized his right to live in the colony and own land. For Lopez, it was basically a screw you to Rhode Island, and then he moved back to Newport. The years leading up to the American Revolution were not easy for Aaron Lopez. Several colonies decided to stop importing British goods until Parliament repealed what they considered unlawful taxes. This cut into the profits of merchants like Lopez, and he skirted both non-importation agreements and British taxes. Ezra Stiles, who otherwise admired Lopez, called him, quote, a Jew merchant for enriching himself at the expense of the patriotic cause.
Safe for posterity. Oh, you've corrected it. Good job. Good job. What's up, Vips? He embraces it, GMK. He just wants to kind of chuck and jive when it break bread. You coming down this way in your extended Challenger, Vips?
After the War for Independence broke out in 1775, Lopez made his peace with the Patriot cause and American independence. After the Patriots won, Lopez praised what he called a glorious American victory at Yorktown. And then, alas, he met a rather inglorious demise. On his way back to Newport in 1782, Lopez stopped to water his horse in a pond. He didn't realize how deep the pond was, and he drowned with his family watching. When they looked back on the life of Aaron Lopez, the residents of Newport noted his great wealth, but they often did so with an air of resentment. They wondered, why was he so much wealthier than his neighbors? Perhaps his gains were ill-gotten, even those that didn't come from slaving. His neighbors accused him of breaking patriotic agreements, bribing customs officials, and of passing off worthless continental paper money to unsuspecting farmers. The history of Newport's Jewish community became less glorious.
You know who also liked to break continental trade agreements? George Washington. Let me guess. Ned the Coward is using your degenerate channel as a hit channel to do his dirty work and wash his hands of any blood like Pilate did. Pilate killed your God, buddy. How predictable and avoiding accountability. The fuck are you talking about, crazy person? I use my channel for my purposes.
After the U.S. had won its independence. Not all of those who had fled the British occupation moved back, and some who did return later moved to New York and other cities. Back in 1763, Newport's synagogue, Congregation Yeshuat Yisrael, had finished building an elegant building. It was later named for Isaac Churro, who was the synagogue's chazan, or cantor. But now, after the war, the building became more and more empty. This wasn't because of anti-Semitism. It's just that for Jewish merchants who aspired to be full citizens of the United States, there were simply better opportunities in other cities. In 1789, George Washington was elected the first president of the United States under the new federal constitution. Early in his presidency, he toured New England, but he skipped Rhode Island because it hadn't yet ratified the Constitution. After Rhode Island finally agreed to ratify the Constitution, Washington went.
Todd, look, fear in my eyes, you will see none. Do tell, Todd. Vips. Ever the troll. And you even look like a troll. That's the funny thing. What's up, Asherah? Let me see if I can find something. I need to. It's all right, Todd. It's all right.
Went for a visit in August 1790. That day went the same way that every day goes when you're the president visiting a city. The whole town turned out and there were lots of speeches. But in the 18th century, speeches were often written in the form of a letter. The town leaders made a speech, the Masons made a speech, the Christian clergy made a speech, lots and lots of speeches. The Jewish congregation of Newport was also invited to make a speech in the form of a letter written by Moses Seixas, the synagogue's warden. The letter starts by asserting that, quote, the children of the stock of Abraham joined their fellow citizens in welcoming Washington to Newport. That sounds bland, but it's actually a rather significant claim. These Jews understood themselves as fellow citizens of the new nation, not just refugees or grudgingly tolerated outsiders, fellow citizens. In fact, their letter noted that the Jews of Newport had heretofore been deprived of the invaluable rights of free citizens. They may have been thinking of Rhode Island's treatment of Aaron Lopez and Isaac Eliezer. The implication was that going forward, they would not be denied those rights. Seixas and his fellow congregants made clear their aspiration for a future in which their rights were secure. Here's what Moses Seixas wrote.
Deprived as we heretofore have been of the invaluable rights of free citizens, we now with a deep sense of gratitude to the Almighty, disposer of all events, behold a government erected by the majesty of the people, a government which to bigotry gives no sanction, to persecution no assistance, but generously affording to all liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship, deeming everyone of whatever nation, tongue, or language equal parts of the great governmental machine.
Now, when President Washington made it to New York City a few days.
What's up, Wyatt? In that a beautiful thing to say, right? We've been denied our rights, but we are here with my fellow citizens. It's amazing how the oppressed, indigenous peoples, Jews, blacks, slaves, hell, even Irish and Italians, loved this country despite their rights being stomped on, and accepted their fate and still considered themselves fellow citizens. Kind of crazy, eh?
Days later, he sent a letter back to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, and Washington's response incorporated the language and the ideals of the congregation. Here's what Washington had to say.
All possess a like liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no more that toleration is spoken of, as if it were the indulgence of one class of people, that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens.
And then Washington closed with his favorite reference from the book of Micah, from the Hebrew Bible.
May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall...
Vips, you will not try to dox somebody on my channel. Not going to happen.
be none to make him afraid.
It's a powerful vision.
Exactly, boss.
There weren't many places on earth where Jews were able to dwell safely and in freedom. Washington was fond of describing his beloved home at Mount Vernon as his vine and fig tree. And in this letter, he was promising that the small Newport Jewish community could experience the same safety that he had as the president and commander-in-chief. And how were American Jews going to experience that peace and safety? Washington had advanced a powerful idea that minority religious and ethnic groups, like the Jews, didn't deserve toleration. Instead, they had inherent natural rights. In other words, religious freedom wasn't something that the powerful gave to the weak. It was something that all humans inherently deserved.
Todd, you need to go back and listen. Rhode Island was the one oppressing the fucking Jews. You stupid fuck. Yeah, stuff more food in your gullet.
And then there are those famous words that Washington borrowed from Seixas, that the United States government would give to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. The remarkable thing is that those words, which were reprinted in newspapers across the country, were not literally true. In 1790, the Constitution prevented a religious test or oath from being used to bar religious minorities from office. But there was no Bill of Rights yet. That wouldn't be ratified until the following year. And once the Bill of Rights had been added to the Constitution, those first 10 amendments, along with the ban on religious tests or oaths, applied only to the federal government, not to the states. And that wouldn't change for more than a century. At the time Washington wrote his letter, Jews still could not vote or hold office in Rhode Island. And that was the case in most states. To bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, was a powerful ideal, an ideal shared by both the nation's first president and by the Jews of Newport. But it wasn't reality, not yet. Moses Seixas worked in commerce, helped organize the state bank, and was the leader of Rhode Island's Masons. He knew how the world worked, and he knew that Jews weren't guaranteed a place in it.
Oh no, he was a Mason. Oh no, Todd.
The Jews of Newport knew that history. They knew what the present reality was. They also knew what the ideals of their new nation were, and they were determined to make those ideals a reality. Seixas and the Newport Synagogue ended their letter to Washington with a wish.
When, like Joshua, full of days and full of honor, you are gathered to your fathers, may you be admitted into the heavenly paradise to partake of the water of life and the tree of immortality.
Since before the founding of the Republic, American Jews...
Sad and lonely, Todd? You observe and report? Yeah, you're a snitch, ain't you, Todd? You like that snitchy to snitch. I answered your question. You complained about Todd being the only one allowed to be oppressed when Seixas was talking about fucking Rhode Island. So you need to listen. You can't observe and report, Mr. Eyes and Ears driver. Sad and lonely. I have cats. I have my kids. Soros was not a snitch. That's a very libelous statement you're making towards someone you're very afraid of, and someone who could carry through with trigger warning.
Jews have faced discrimination, opposition, exclusion, hatred, violence, slander, and conspiratorial thinking. What Seixas and his fellow Jews wanted was no less than what Washington took for granted: to live peacefully under their own vine and fig tree in a country where they too would be, as Washington powerfully declared himself in his last will and testament, a citizen of the United States.
All right, that is episode 1. Let me.
Support for Antisemitism USA comes from the Henry Luce Foundation and the David Bruce Smith Foundation. Jacob Henry and his wife, Esther, were prosperous. Henry owned several hundred acres of land and 12 slaves. Jacob and
I think, wasn't it only Madison who was a Jew anyway? His mother was a Jew, born in Jamaica. Let me look. Hamilton, excuse me, Alexander Hamilton. Was born and raised Jewish. I preferred Burr as the founding father, but Todd would think Burr was a pinko commie too. He believed in women's rights, freeing the slaves.
Esther had a home near the waterfront. In 1809, Jacob Henry won re-election to the North Carolina legislature, where he represented the citizens of Carteret County. Henry was a Federalist, but it was the Republicans, the party of Thomas Jefferson and the newly inaugurated President James Madison, who had a large majority in the state legislature. After his re-election, Henry traveled to Raleigh and took his oath of office. And then, 2 weeks later, he got a rude shock. One of his fellow legislators filed a motion to vacate his seat. In other words, they wanted to kick Henry out. The objection was on religious grounds. Jacob Henry was a Jew. I'm Mark Oppenheimer, and this is Antisemitism USA, a podcast about the history of anti-Semitism in the United States. This is episode 2, Moral Citizens. In the early years of the country, only certain kinds of virtuous people were believed to be.
The only thing I did was deleted one comment that was an attempt at doxing. What's up, Oklahoma?
Be capable of self-governance. And whom did Americans consider virtuous? Protestant Christians. Not Catholics, not atheists, and certainly not Jews. In this episode, we'll look at how Jews were excluded from holding political office, and then we'll turn to a 19th century society that attempted to convert Jews to Christianity to make them into moral citizens. But for now, let's get back to Jacob Henry and North Carolina politics. North Carolina's state constitution of 1776 declared that all persons shall be at liberty to exercise their own mode of worship. Before the American Revolution, the Church of England became established as the official church of North Carolina. But the state constitution there made it clear that no one would be forced to pay for the church or attend any place of worship that was against their own faith and judgment. So why would the legislature...
Todd, I don't care about your threats. I fuck up people's plans all the time.
Even considered denying Jacob Henry his seat. Henry had won the election fair and square. Nobody doubted that. Here's historian David Sahat, author of The Myth of American Religious Freedom.
I know, Danny, but it was an attempt. And then I won't play the game. Trump said bread breaker. Yeah, indeed. Oh, Todd. It's okay. I've got them. I've got the clips. I've got the clips.
At least early on in American history, a lot of times rights were connected to your religious beliefs. Various states in the early republic limited voting, for example, to either Protestants or Christians or theists. So that last category would include Jews, but the first two would not. There were various limitations on who could run for office. And these limitations were sometimes explicit, like we just don't allow Jews to run for office, or they were implicit in that you had to take an oath that was a Christian oath that affirmed the divinity of Jesus and the divine inspiration of the Old and the New Testaments, which would obviously exclude Jews. So really, in all the ways in which you encounter the state, if you pair a religious obligation or a religious identity to interacting with the state, you put those who are outside that identity at disadvantage, and Jews were frequently at disadvantage.
Todd, I am not the government, nor am I representing the government in this role. So shut the fuck up. Listen. You can comment, but don't be a dick.
Advantage.
The problem Henry faced was that in North Carolina in 1809, the state constitution barred Jews from office, even though it didn't mention them. The article said
that no person who shall deny the being of God or the truth of the Protestant religion, or the divine authority either of the Old or New Testament, or who shall hold religious principles incompatible with the freedom and safety of the state, shall be capable of holding any office or place of trust or profit in the civil department within this state.
So, to hold office in North Carolina, the state constitution required you to be a Protestant. It also required you to believe both the Old and New Testaments. So, while a Jewish person might have been able to claim truthfully that they believed in the Bible, they wouldn't think of the New Testament as being divine. While the United States Constitution banned this sort of religious test for federal office holding, it wasn't until the middle of the 20th century that the Supreme Court applied.
Vippy, do you not think I see a disingenuous cunt, at least two of them on that panel, as thinking that they're gonna try to trap me into something? Yeah. I hadn't snitched on nobody, Todd. You snitch on people. I had the emails to prove that too, right, Todd? But you do you, Queen. You do you. Dog walking me how, Todd? I haven't said what I'm gonna do tomorrow. So I'm just having a little fun.
Applied the federal prohibition.
He's the golden snitch.
The authors of the North Carolina Constitution believed in religious liberty. They'd stopped funding their own Christian churches. The restriction in their state constitution was aimed at keeping Catholics out of office, because Protestants generally considered Catholicism to be incompatible with liberty. In 1776, when North Carolina adopted its new constitution, there were maybe 2,000 Jews living in the United States. But when Protestants...
Yeah, Tom, it said roses are red, violets are blue. I smoke cocks. I wish you would too. I don't know what he meant by smoking cocks, but, you know, I don't. He can smoke them all he wants.
Protestants thought about groups they didn't want voting or in government. They thought about Catholics as well as an additional trifecta of Jews, Mohammedans, which meant Muslims, and infidels, whom today we might call atheists.
What happened when states stopped paying churches is that many religious groups instead turned to morality as a proxy to maintain religious control. So they would write their moral ideals into law.
Thanks for admitting that you can't create your own content, buddy. But I mean, we know that you let other people's shit play for an hour without saying a word, so you can go, I don't know, lubricate your food,
and thereby shape the public contours of American culture and of American society. And this then gave American culture throughout the 19th century a kind of Protestant feel or vibe, because in many ways, the official public morality enforceable by the law and in government was Protestant. It came out of Protestant sensibilities. It reinforced Protestant moral ideas, and it ultimately gave Protestants control over that society to a large degree.
I mean, tell me you don't like wearing gimp mask without telling me you like wearing gimp mask, Todd. Confession through projection, Ashra. I was watching a interview last night, and this dude, I think in one stream, one moderator had blocked 1,200 chatters. No. You need to check your membership rolls there, buddy. I don't miss a thing.
Protestants in particular believed that once you became a Christian, there was an obligation to redeem or sanctify society and to make it more Christian, which in effect meant make it more like the kind of society that we want to see in our churches, but now on a kind of national level.
Hey, Jess.
And so if you weren't in that group, you were in a problematic position. And Jews in particular had been a subject of persecution precisely because they were never going to be Christian.
Henry hadn't stood out in North Carolina politics. No one objected to him the first time he won a seat in the legislature.
Poor
But now,
Paul.
the second time around, someone raised the issue of his religion. On December 5th, 1809, North Carolina legislator Hugh Mills made a motion to vacate Henry's seat.
It is therefore made known that a certain Jacob Henry, a member of his house, denies the divine authority of the New Testament and refused to take the oath prescribed by law for his qualification, in violation of the Constitution of this state.
Mills had two objections. First, that Henry denied the authority of the New Testament. And second, that Henry refused to take the prescribed oath. Here things get a little murky. Mills might have meant that Henry did not swear his oath on the Christian Bible. But there were workarounds in place for Quakers and for others who refused to swear oaths. It isn't clear why Mills introduced the motion at all. Was it because he was a Republican and Henry was a Federalist? It could have been as simple as an attempt to disqualify a member of the other party. But Henry seemed to get on with other Republicans, and some of them rallied to his defense. Perhaps Mills had some sort of grudge against Henry. The next day,
I understand it. You're walking through the holiest city to Jews, and Christians dare to change our Bible to try to steal a birthright that is not theirs. There's ways to reach the God of Abraham, Moses, and Jacob. There was no room for a human sacrifice that was made up. Spitting on people is not the way to do it. I agree with that, but I understand it. You you got to think about when in 1099 the Crusaders decided they were going to kill all the Jews in Jerusalem because the Jews didn't believe in Jesus. So I don't expect you to have any empathy, Todd. Todd spit at a Muslim on a flow stream. So
Jacob Henry delivered a speech before the House. Here's what
not in person, but it was a figurative thing. He knows what he did and knows why he did it.
he said.
Mr. Speaker, I am sure that you cannot see anything in this religion to deprive me of my seat in this House.
Got the clip. We play it regularly. Think we might play it tonight. Thank you. Goodbye.
What may be the religion of him who made this objection against me, or whether he has any religion or not, I am unable to say. I have never considered it my duty to pry into the belief of other members
He was on camera, Vitz.
of this House. If their actions are upright and conduct just, the rest is for their own consideration, not for mine. I do not seek to make converts to my faith, nor do I exclude anyone from my esteem or friendship because he and I differ in that respect. The same charity, therefore, it is not unreasonable to expect will be extended to myself, because in all things that relate to the state and the duties of civil life, I am bound by the same obligations with my fellow citizens, nor does many subscribe more sincerely than myself to the maxim, whatever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye so even unto them, for such is the law and prophets.
You can hear Henry arguing for Judaism as a moral religion. It was important to American Jews that they presented themselves to their fellow citizens this way. And it was a pretty slick move to quote Jesus' version of the Golden Rule. That may or may not have been Henry's idea. Rumor has it that one of his political allies wrote the speech for him. The North Carolina House of Commons discussed all sorts of questions about Henry's faith. Had anyone ever seen him in synagogue? Unlikely, because North Carolina Jews hadn't built one yet. Someone claimed he'd seen Henry at Baptist and Methodist meetings. Did Henry eat pork? No one knew. In fact, no one came forward with any information about Henry's religious principles and practices. The clerk of the House of Commons did testify that Henry wished to swear his oath on an Old Testament. Still, Jacob Henry was a Jew, so it was a pretty clear-cut case. Or was it? As it turned out, the House overwhelmingly rejected Mills's motion, and Henry kept his seat. Why? Again, it's not entirely clear. One representative argued that the restrictions on office holding didn't apply to the legislature. Anyway, Henry finished his term, and then he apparently retired from state politics. He served in the War of 1812 and later moved to Charleston, South Carolina, which had one of the largest Jewish populations in the country. North Carolina, however, kept the restrictions in its constitution, and Henry's defenders did not argue in favor of changing them, nor did the legislators argue that Jews should be able to hold office in North Carolina. They seated Henry on a technicality. It wasn't until 1868 that North Carolina permitted non-Christians to hold office. Today,
1868, y'all. That's when we think about it, that's not terribly far removed in the we think about the Civil War and the turn of the century, really not that far away from removed. Hello, kiddo.
its constitution still disqualifies from office, quote, anyone who shall deny the being of Almighty God. That prohibition wouldn't hold up in court, but it's still on the books. So what's the meaning of the Jacob Henry case? Is it an instance of anti-Jewish bigotry? Or is it a triumph for religious liberty, for the inclusion of Jews as full citizens in the new republic? History rarely lets us tell such straightforward stories. Let's leave it at this. The status of Jews as citizens in the early American Republic was murky. Jews had religious liberty, but their status as citizens remained unclear. Based on the laws on the books in many states, Jews did not have a guaranteed right to full participation as citizens. But until those laws were tested, it was unclear whether anyone would enforce them. So when Jews like Henry ran for office, they forced the issue. They put their fellow citizens to the test. One key to understanding this paradox is the larger history of emancipation in Europe and the United States. Emancipation refers to a political process in which a group of people is released from political disabilities and gets their equality under the law. In the United States, we tend to associate the word emancipation with African Americans during the Civil War and the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation. 2 years later, that freedom was guaranteed to all under the 13th Amendment. And as important as the end of slavery was, it was just as important that Black people became full citizens. Citizenship for Black people was supposed to be guaranteed by the 14th Amendment and the right to vote by the 15th Amendment. But in practice, those rights were often denied. And it took another century of struggle before Black Americans could hope for the state to safeguard their rights. In other words, full emancipation was a
Jess, being raised in Georgia, it's kind of mandatory. It's issued at birth.
process, not an event. Now, Jews were never enslaved in the United States. In fact, like Jacob Henry, there were Jews who owned slaves. But Jews in the United States had not been and were not yet fully equal citizens. Here's historian David Sorkin, author of the book Jewish Emancipation.
Emancipation isn't a word for Americans that's usually connected to Jews, or for that matter, other religious groups. But in European history, emancipation does apply to the sphere of religion. The dominant religion in a society would have the right of public worship, meaning to say it could have a church with a spire and bells and could have public processions. A religion in an inferior position could have the right of private worship, which meant no spires, no bells, and no public processions. And then the lowest form of worship was called domestic observance, where the adherents of a religious group could just meet in someone's home in small groups. And Jews were slotted into that hierarchy of political status of religious groups. In many cases, they only had the right of domestic observance or private observance. What emancipation came to mean in Europe was the release of religious groups from a status of political inferiority. So take the case of England, for example. All Protestant dissenters, non-Anglican Protestant groups, Catholics and Jews, were in a position of political inferiority until the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. Protestant dissenters gained equality. Catholics in England only gained political equality and the right of public worship in 1829.
Fact that Jews were run out of England in the 11th century, I believe. And then the Catholics severely persecuted in England. Hence, you have the issue of the Irish problem, right?
And that was called Catholic.
Not really a problem. I think they had a right to self-determine, but
Emancipation. And that's where the term came from that was then applied more generally to Jews. Jews only gained emancipation in England in 1858, when the first Jew was allowed to take a seat in the House of Commons and become a member of Parliament. And that sort of process appeared across Europe of minority or dissenting religions gaining political equality, usually Christian groups first, then followed by Jews. So emancipation in Europe was applied to religious groups and meant the attainment of political equality.
Jews in Europe were not treated as individual citizens. In Livorno, in Italy, or Bordeaux,
bigotry, racial hatred, jealousy, fear, run people out and get to keep their stuff, Hey, Walter.
France, or Hamburg, Germany, Jews were treated as members of communities. They were collectively given certain rights through charters. But both Europe and North America experienced a huge political shift brought on by the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and other revolutions that swept across Europe. New states, like the United States, or North Carolina in the United States, stopped giving rights to specific communities and started thinking of rights as something that belonged to individual citizens.
I mean, with England, you can look anywhere in the globe and find them where they were when they were colonial. Find them destroying communities and running people out of their homes. So yeah, it wasn't just the Jews.
Equal under the law. Think back for a moment to all that legalese from the North Carolina Constitution. Now that we understand how Jewish emancipation unfolded in Europe and the US, the Constitution should make more sense. The North Carolina Constitution was, in one sense, modern. There was no longer an official state church in North Carolina. There was a measure of religious freedom. But the Constitution also referred to groups of people with different degrees of citizenship. Even if the language was about people who believed in God and the Bible, it was clear that Protestants as a group were meant to have full rights of citizenship, and Catholics and Jews were not. Or was it clear? Just because something is written down in the law books doesn't mean the law is actually applied. According to the plain meaning of the North Carolina Constitution, Catholics weren't supposed to even be in the legislature.
Do you not understand what colonialism is, Todd? I'm sure you I'm sure you do. Todd.
Legislature. But there were at least 2 Catholics in that legislature. We know that because when Jacob Henry was denied his seat, the Catholics spoke up to support him. Henry decided that Jews should have the full rights of citizenship, so he ran for office and served his term in 1808. Then he won again in 1809, and when he was denied his seat, he argued that Jews could be good citizens. Here's historian David Sorkin.
I can't emphasize too strongly. Jews had to mobilize, whether as individuals or collectively, in order to gain political rights at the state level in the early 19th century.
Rewind, Todd. This ain't your show.
And I say that because conventional histories or conventional accounts of American Jewish history tend to discount these events and not to see them as part of a larger struggle for emancipation, but to see them as kind of anomalies that really don't quite fit into what has come to be called American Jewish exceptionalism, this notion that Jews in the United States had equal rights from the start under the federal Constitution, and unlike in Europe, never had to struggle to gain rights and equality and citizenship. And I think that simply isn't the case. It's just that historians of American Jewry have been reluctant to try and take what looks like a very mild process and compare it to its European counterparts.
The point is, Henry's case was messy, and that messiness is one part of this story. But so is the way that Jews argued over and over for the rights of citizens. Let's consider what was happening in Maryland at roughly the same time. As in North Carolina, Maryland didn't have many Jews, but there were some. And the Maryland Constitution didn't explicitly bar Jews from holding office, but it did include a religious test that excluded them. Maryland's Jews had to petition over and over for the right to hold office. A so-called Jew bill was introduced in the legislature to allow Jews to hold office, but it failed in 1802, and it failed again in 1804, and in 1819, and in 1822. It wasn't until 1825 that the bill was passed, and Jews could take office the next year. Or let's consider what was happening in Philadelphia.
Once again, this is about a test act that you have to take an oath in order to have.
Yeah, Oshin, I think that it won't turn out well for him if he had to take on the whole sins of the Christians. That was terrible. I saw the feeds from there. It was not pretty. All right, let's get through this so we can get to
have
Spider
political
Dog.
rights The test read as follows: I do acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. And a group of Jews in Philadelphia protested against this, saying, quote, this deprives Jews of the most eminent rights of free men. They wrote a petition, which they sent to the press, but also to the legislature, in which they said that this religious test was, quote, a stigma upon their nation and religion. And then they made the same kind of argument that Jacob Henry would make later on, a legal argument that this contradicted the Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights, which had declared that, quote, no man who acknowledges the being of a God can be justly deprived or abridged of any civil rights as a citizen on account of his religious sentiments. So what they're pointing to is a contradiction in the laws of Pennsylvania itself between its Declaration of Rights and the way that those rights are being implemented. So first they make that legal argument, and then they go on to make the argument for their worthiness for rights, that they are upstanding citizens. They say they've earned their rights by being conscientious, tax-paying property owners and merchants. Then they also appeal to their service to the revolution. And they argue that they served the revolution in both blood and treasure. They served in the army and they donated money. We see the same kind of argumentation, but this is actually a case of collective political action, where a group of Jews are acting together, writing a petition, submitting it to the newspapers, and submitting it to the legislature.
Different state, but same story. Even as the United States was starting to think more and more in terms of individual rights.
But you notice that all of these oaths more than once, Trump said. But the oaths say but a belief in a God, divine being. No, I don't release my tax returns, you stupid fuck. God, you're dumb. I can do the simple math, Todd. Let's see. Oh, but anyway, in a divine being, right? So these are Masonic oaths, not Christian or any other religion oath.
The older idea of thinking in terms of groups persisted. The assumption was that Protestant Christians had full rights because their Christianity made them moral, and that Jews did not have full rights because they didn't have the morality of Protestantism. But Jews individually and collectively appealed for their rights, and bit by bit, they got them. Jacob Henry understood what was at stake. Let's hear his words.
Shall this free country try set an example of persecution, which even the returning reason of enslaved Europe would not submit to? Will you bind the conscience in chains and fasten conviction upon the mind in spite of the conclusions of reason and of those ties and habitudes which are blended with every pulsation of the heart? Are you prepared to plunge at once from the sublime heights of moral legislation?
I'm way different than an elected president. How about we ask for JJ's tax returns and Amber's? They're public employees. One is an elected official. Where has he been, Todd? Why is he hiding, Todd? He's your buddy. But yeah, elected officials should be required to release their tax returns. I don't think people need to make deals for me. About 14 minutes
into the
left.
dark and gloomy caverns of superstitious ignorance? Will you drive from your shores and from the shelter of your constitutions all who do not lay their oblations on the same altar, observe the same ritual, and subscribe to the same dogmas?
But at the same time that Henry was making that speech, standing up for the political rights of Jews, all over the country, thousands of Americans were giving money to a group of Christians who wanted to convert Jews to make.
Danny, his claim is 50% of 50%, so a quarter.
From Christians. More on that after the break. Imagine a farm where a group of immigrant Jews are trying to live collectively and support one another. Did you imagine a kibbutz in Israel? A small farm in the Eastern European wilderness? Try imagining that farm in upstate New York. And the farm is not run by Jews, but rather by Christian missionaries who want to convert them. Well, maybe not exactly convert them, just millions.
No, I do not condone doxing. Todd. No one ever doxed your family. Stupid fuck. Make those claims about me, but never provided receipts. It's amazing. Keep my pilot hands clean of blood.
Ameliorate or improve their condition.
Prove it. I'll wait. Just like K-Far said with old SARS Finkel, huh? Needs to be in jail. I'll wait. I'll wait for your receipts. Todd.
It's a phrase that was only slightly less awkward in the 19th century than it is today. I'm talking about the American Society for Ameliorating the Condition of the Jews. That's a mouthful, so let's just call it the ASMCJ, or just the Society. In the early 19th century, the Society was an example of the benevolence movement. At that moment in American history, Americans loved to join organizations. We might call many of these organizations philanthropic. Today, we might call them charitable.
False equivalency.
But in the 19th century, they were often called benevolent societies or benevolent organizations. And that word, benevolence, carried a very Christian connotation. Some of these groups aimed their benevolence at Jews. Take the Female Society of Boston and the vicinity for promoting Christianity amongst the Jews, founded in 1816. For 52 cents per year, or $10 for a lifetime membership, you could join with other like-minded women in the hopes of converting Jews. Or you might correspond with the older and rather better funded London Society for promoting Christianity among Jews. But if you were worried about...
I mean, I'm pretty good at woodwork. I have wood and nails. I mean, he did make a claim, and he's never provided proof because it doesn't exist.
The salvation of American Jews, your best bet was to send your money to the American Society for Ameliorating the Condition of the Jews. To help us untangle all of this, here is Susanna Lindsley, author of the article Saving the Jews.
New York in the 1820s was a time of a lot of interdenominational cooperation and collaboration. The American Board of Commissioners of Foreign Missions was founded in 1810. The American Bible Society in 1816. The New York Missionary Society was really popular. And then the American Colonization Society was 1817. So this was a real milieu, a real environment of trying to find ways for different Christian denominations to work together to spread the gospel, to spread the word, and to find ways to come together around their own differences. And so the American Society to Ameliorate the Condition Among the Jews was a way to celebrate this unique position that many American political and religious elite found themselves in, that they were in a position to usher in a new era of cooperation that had never been possible before. And they were really excited about this time, about how tolerant they were, about how accepting they were. And so many of them thought the best way to really celebrate and demonstrate just how tolerant they were was to try to convert as many Jews as possible to Christianity.
Protestants wanted Jews to become Christian.
Oh, you mean the non-elected official that's going around stealing everybody's information? Yeah, get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse, but he's gonna steal all your information. Non-elected, non-official office. How dangerous. Looks like you would be scared of something like that. It's a very Stasi-esque approach to gathering information.
Christians because, well, they wanted everyone to become Christian. And evangelical Christians, including those who created the society, had a real activist streak. They were always forming institutions to do everything from print Bibles to promoting temperance to end the consumption of alcohol. But there was more to it than that. It's fair to say that evangelicals can get, shall we say, a little obsessed with Jews.
There were several different reasons. A lot of the people involved had a real sympathy for Christian Zionism or restorationism, where they believed that the second coming wasn't possible until Jews were restored to Israel. But in an American context, both Protestants and Jews were optimistic that a new Zion was possible, and that new Zion was possible in the United States. And so bringing Jews into the United States and bringing them into Christianity was a way to bring about the second coming. The Protestant conviction to evangelize the Jews was rooted in anti-Semitic beliefs that Judaism wasn't a legitimate faith. And in fact, that's why they saw themselves as so liberal and tolerant.
This is why so many Hasidics are angry with Christian missionaries in Jerusalem and Israel, is they denigrate and talk poorly about Judaism and then try to convert Jews. It's funny that they don't require messianics to say they're Christians, but still say they're Jews. Okay, Todd, you're over 2,000 on yours and you get 44 views. So you bought yours as well? Is that what you're claiming? All mine are organic and within terms of service. It's called networking, getting shout outs, stuff like that, you know, actually working to build the channel and not, hey, according to Vippy's sock account, all of you are Jews.
Right. We're so liberal and tolerant that we're going to overlook all of the issues we have with Jews
you say,
and acknowledge that they, in
yes.
fact, can be Christian.
In other words, evangelicals and other Protestants in early America weren't like the scientific racists we'll discuss in later episodes, who believed that to be Jewish was in the blood and could never change. To the contrary, they assumed that being Jewish was a matter of religion, and so Jews could just change if they became Christian. And if you'll recall our discussion of Jacob Henry, the general assumption was that Christianity made you more moral, and being moral was a requirement for being a citizen. Had Henry just converted to Christianity, no one would have been able to suggest that he wasn't qualified to hold office on religious grounds. Being a Christian, they could trust that he was moral, that he was virtuous, that he was fit to be a legislator. So a group of Christians based in New York formed a society to evangelize and colonize the Jews. The idea was to support Jews who had already converted to Christianity, whether in Europe or the United States, and to have a colony or farm where they could live. Their thinking was that Jews who converted to Christianity would be cast out of their own communities and need support. Some pretty heavy hitters supported the society. John Quincy Adams was an honorary vice president at the same time that he was Secretary of State of the whole country. The presidents of Princeton, Yale, and Rutgers all at one time or another served on the society's board. The mere fact that the society was incorporated by New York is significant. Incorporation offered legal and financial protections, and the state only gave these privileges to institutions that it thought were advancing the public good. Susanna Lindsley explains.
When the society incorporated, it became legally recognized under New York law, and the New York State Legislature didn't want to legally recognize a corporation that was built around evangelizing, or at least that had it listed so specifically in its name. And because of that, the society had to find a name that would be more palatable to the New York government, and in fact, more legal. And so came to the name the Society for Ameliorating the Condition of the Jews.
The society, of course, continued to try to convert Jews. you could say that conversion would be a complete and total amelioration. Uninterested in being converted, Jewish publications attacked the society.
Solomon Henry Jackson was a notable Jewish printer. He was interesting because he married outside the faith. He married a woman who was Presbyterian, but he raised his 5 children in the Jewish faith. So he started a newspaper in direct response to the ASMCJ's paper, Israel's Advocate. And his paper he called The Jew, being a defense of Judaism against all adversaries, and particularly against the insidious attacks of Israel's Advocate. And Jackson was outraged by the society's conviction that its mission represented a new era of cooperation. And he called their bluff that they treated Jews with respect. He called them out. He said that society still marked Jews as, he said, they marked them as stricken, smitten, and afflicted by God. Jackson reminded the society, our persecutions, exiles, and massacres always began in the very manner and plan that you're pursuing now, by bribing them with land, by giving resources to support conversion. And he was saying this society is doing nothing new. This is using the same tricks that Christians have used for centuries to violently strip Jews of their faith. And he was a real firebrand. He was really angry about this.
So what effect did the society have in the world? If its goals were to convert Jews to Christianity, the results were pretty dismal.
Its success to evangelize and colonize Jews was very small. There were 7 converts. The organization was never able to establish a colony.
A lot of the society's problems were due to squabbling within its leadership. Their lead missionary, Joseph Samuel Christian Frederick Free, was accused of financial impropriety, not to mention general ineffectiveness. The society puttered along for a few decades before closing shop. Jewish newspapers might have laughed at how much money the ASMCJ raised to convert a few Jews to Christianity. But in another sense, the Society for Ameliorating the Condition of the Jews was a smashing success because it raised a lot of money. And how did it do that?
The organization itself.
Yeah, that should tell you a lot, right? Ashra couldn't hold office just because of his faith, but was rich as shit. So sounds like a certain billionaire we all know that certain people like to call a Nazi, but they are not.
Did have some significant success. It was founded in 1820, and men and women from every major Protestant denomination joined auxiliary societies and made donations for the project. Between March and April of 1824, there were auxiliary societies started within Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, Congregationalists, and Lutheran congregations. In Charleston, South Carolina, in 1824, they collected $626 for the mission. In 1823, the society had assembled 46 auxiliary societies in 12 states. And by 1825, the number had ballooned to 231. And by the end of the society in 1827, Frey had reported organizing over 400 local branches.
So the society may not have succeeded in converting many Jews, but then Christians had been failing to convert Jews for 1,800 years by this point. Where they did succeed was in convincing thousands and thousands of people spread across 400 local branches to give money to convert Jews. And those people gave money because they thought Jews would be damned to hell if they didn't convert to Christianity. But they also gave money because they believed that Christianity, and not Judaism, had to be the basis of the American Republic. So yes, it's true that only one legislator tried to stand in the way of Jacob Henry holding office in North Carolina. But for every legislator like that, there were many, many more people willing to donate money to try to turn Jews, like Jacob Henry, into Christian citizens. And the reason Henry kept his legislative seat, and one of the reasons that the society managed to convert only 7 Jews, was that American Jews stood up for their rights. They claimed that Jews should have the full rights of citizens at a time when they were excluded as a class from political office and other civil rights. And when their fellow citizens tried to make them Christians for the good of the nation as well as to save their eternal souls, Jews pointed out that their own religion was perfectly good at making them moral citizens. Thank you for listening to Antisemitism USA. It's a production of R2 Studios, part of the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University.
uh, I try to save money so I can give money when there's a need. Um, that is the calling. When the poor, the childless, and the fatherless, the widow, a friend is in need, I am able to help. So, and GS, I don't know you a damn thing. Well, explain to me then, Todd, how uh, you one of the religions corrupted the scriptures of the other religion to fit their narrative and to build a following of 1/4 of the Earth's population and sitting on a pile of gold. I'll give you a hint. It ain't Israel. that would hang on. Let me find some Lucas. Yeah, real quick. Here.
Oh, you're talking about the part with me in Florida and the Skittles in my foreskin. Yeah, okay. No, that was like a wordsmith there.
Jew at? Where's the Jew at? Let's find the Jew. Jew.
You go, toddler. Ask Lucas Gage how that works out. Oh, I said friends, Todd. I don't give a fuck about you. I wouldn't spit on you if you're in a ditch. Yeah, the people should really. I probably should do something on the Jewish community in India and in. Sounded like a threat. I wouldn't spit on you if you were in a ditch. Is not a threat. It is a statement of apathy. Look the word up. Yes, you're a sad child. Shalom. About to be Shabbat Shalom. I have some things to do to get that done. Let me see. Hang on. Let me get the link to. Now I got Lucas's freaking cadence in my head. Damn it. Angel, are you still in here? The Good Samaritan absolutely is New Testament, generally specific, and you have proven yourself to be not worthy. See, I'm being respectful, Todd. I said I wouldn't spit on you. You, Angel. I just saw your message. Isn't coded so nice. All right. Spider Dog is coming up in 19 minutes. Which one has more brain damage than the other, Todd? And I can still get a pilot's license with TBI. It's amazing. Yeah, Todd, let me see your receipts on how much you've donated to him. Sword and Shield, baby. Sword and Shield. You know, you can say brain damage. Are you making medical diagnoses? Are you qualified to do that? I thought you were an English major, or were you a criminal justice major, or were you a corrections major, or were you just a keep the ADD meds under control? I do. I keep them under control. Thank you. He was a cheesy poofs major. No, that would denote he knew how to work a trade. All right, y'all. I'm gonna leave it here. Remember Spider Dog in about 15 minutes, and I'll see y'all later, probably over on the hill with all the pirates. Jerk of all trades, ambidextrous. I'll leave it there.